Hello, science students. Welcome to your notes about testing your hypothesis and drawing conclusions. Go ahead and write down your title on page 6 of your interactive notebook, and make sure you write down the date underneath the page number. Underneath that, you should write down your essential question, which is, how do scientists test hypotheses? You don't need to write anything down on this slide, but I want you to know that our focus today is to be able to develop an experiment that tests a hypothesis. You don't need to write down anything on this slide, but I want you to know that these are the steps for the scientific process. Last week we talked about the first 3. This week we're going to talk more about testing your hypothesis, analyzing data, and making conclusions. One thing to note is that these look like they're a nice specific order, but sometimes they can go back and forth. You might ask a question, create a hypothesis, and then maybe you learn more information that makes you go back and change your mind. Maybe you test your hypothesis and you find something out that makes you have to go back and make a different hypothesis, okay? So they look like they're in a nice order, but actually you can go back and forth. Please write down all words on this slide. Test your hypothesis. To do that, you need to create a step-by-step plan to help you answer the question. Only change one variable, use action words, collect data, and be specific. You don't need to write down anything here, but I want you to know that it's really important that your directions are so clear and specific that anyone can do your experiment and get the same results. So for example, and you don't need to write anything down here, if I said to test your prediction, if you remember back to our toaster, the prediction was that the outlet was broken. To test that, you could plug the toaster into a different outlet and try again. But those directions, can we make them more specific and clear? I think we can. So here, please write down these 4 directions as an example of clear, specific directions. The first thing you would do is unplug the toaster from the outlet, because if you tried to move it without unplugging it, that would be dangerous. You move the toaster to a new outlet and you plug it in. Then you put your bread into the toaster, you press the button down, and you make observations, okay? These 4 directions are more clear and specific than the original ones, and they would make it easier for another person to test your hypothesis in the same way. Our next step is to analyze data. Please write down the 3 things in colorful boxes. First, you're going to organize your observations, complete your calculations, and you're going to create graphs when you're analyzing data. You use these things to identify trends or patterns in your data. The big question here is, what do you notice? Okay, so you don't need to write anything down on the next slide, but I want you to know that sometimes your data will be numbers and measurements, and sometimes it will be observations. So in this toaster example, we're not going to have numbers or measurements, but we will have observations. So your observation from your toaster could be, does it make a clicking noise or not? Does your bread toast? Does it heat up? Does it stay the same? Okay. Your last step is making conclusions. Please write down the 2 things on this slide. So answer the question in full sentences and use data, numbers, or observations to support your answer. So in this case, you want to say what your answer is and give evidence to support your answer. And the last thing I want you to make note of, you don't have to write this down, but just think about it. If your hypothesis is supported by your data, then you can think that you've answered the question. But if it isn't, and your bread still doesn't toast, then as a scientist, you have to go back to the beginning and you have to try again to find out what the answer is to that question. This concludes your notes for today. Thank you so much for watching.